I'm going to show you some of the most popular handwork stitches used in couture finishing. I'm going to show you a herringbone stitch, a catch stitch, a blind hem stitch, a flat fell stitch and a buttonhole stitch. I'm going to show you these on calico using a coloured thread because that will really show up. I'm using a very long fine needle, a straw or a milliner's needle. Size 8 or 9 is the size I prefer, and I use this because it's got a very tiny eye, it's a very long needle, and it will just slide easily through your fabric. I'm going to start off with a herringbone stitch. So the herringbone stitch is actually an embroidery stitch, but it's such a good stitch to use in couture because it's got movement in it, it will hold the fabric flat, but it will also let it move a little bit if it needs to give. So to do this, I've already started, it crosses over, then it comes back and crosses over and comes back and crosses over. If you're right-handed, you'll work this stitch from left to right. If you're left-handed, you'll work it from right to left. So I'm going to work it by making a little horizontal stitch here into my fabric and pull my thread through, and then it crosses. And we have a little horizontal stitch just above the fold. So let me show you that again. And it crosses over, and there's a little horizontal stitch. And it crosses over, and it's a little horizontal stitch. And you can see that edge is really nice and secure, but it's also got a bit of movement in it. So cross it over, and cross it over. Another version of this stitch is a catch stitch. It's worked very much like a herringbone stitch, but without the crossover. And this is quite a quick stitch to do, quite often used for hemming. So again, it's a horizontal stitch, but I'm working it from right to left. And then it's a stitch above. This is a great stitch for turning up hems quickly. Very similar to the herringbone, but without the cross. Catch stitch. So both of these stitches are stitches that would be used probably in a hem application. So I've got a double fabric here to represent the hem, and if we look on the other side, you can just about see where the stitches are showing. This would be the right side of the fabric, but with a matching thread and on a fabric that isn't quite as fine as calico, you wouldn't notice these stitches. So that's the herringbone stitch and the catch stitch. I'm now going to show you how to do a blind hem stitch. This is exactly what it says. It's a blind hem stitch. Another really useful stitch for hems. Again, I'm using a very fine needle and an all-purpose sewing thread, single thread. I've got my hem pinned up and I've got a pinked edge. And I'm just going to fold that edge back. And this is a really useful stitch to do, even if you're just not concentrating on your couture techniques. It's just a good hemming stitch because it really doesn't show. So you're going to do a little straight stitch into the fold. And then you're going to pick up just a couple of fibres on the main body of the fabric. And these are much smaller stitches than the previous ones. So it's a little stitch into the fold. And then picking up a couple of the threads, just a couple of yarns, and pull it through. And the beauty of this stitch is when you push that back up, hardly anything shows. So So you could give that a light steaming and nothing could show, and on the reverse hardly anything shows. So it truly is a blind hem stitch. The next stitch is a flat fell stitch. I love flat fell stitches. These are usually used to secure a lining in place around a zip or at a waist edge, and it really is a very, very strong little horizontal stitch through a fold. So I've just started on this sample. This time I've still got the same needle, a nice long straw needle, but this time I've got double thread. Now sometimes if you're sewing this down and you're using more of a blind hem stitch, what you might find is this: by running the stitch into the fold and then into the garment, if it came under strain, it might split onto the lining and you get a little hole in your fabric. This is a stitch that goes across the edge. So it's a little straight stitch and pick up at the back. And because this would normally be done in an area where your needle is quite safe to go a lot deeper, on the back you're going to see some stitches, and run it along underneath and come up. So you're about 2 mils, and it's a little straight stitch across that folded edge. I think this is a great little stitch, and it's a really useful stitch in couture sewing. You're going to see this used to secure all sorts of things. Very strong, very secure. Double thread. I've waxed my thread this time with some beeswax. If you just run it through a bit of beeswax, then press it in with your fingers, you'll find the double stitch always runs much better. Double thread. So here we've got lots of little straight stitches, but on the other side we've got a row of long stitches. This would be used in a position in a garment where these stitches would not be visible, so it might be into a zip so you couldn't see it. The final stitch I want to show you is a buttonhole stitch. This is probably the most complicated of the stitches, so if you don't get it when I show it you the first time, just remember you've got the 30-second repeat available to you. Again, we're using double thread, same needle, and this stitch is worked from left to right. It starts off very much like a blanket stitch. So you're going to go through, you bring your needle out at the edge, and this is used for securing things like hooks and eyes, snap fasteners, making bar tacks. So the needle is coming out at the edge, the thread then goes behind the needle and you pull it through. But just before it goes all the way through, you put your thread under again, and this makes a knot. Don't do it too soon, otherwise it will knot where you don't want it to. And the knot pushes down onto the edge. That edge might be the edge of a snap, it might be the edge of a hook and eye. Here is just the edge of the fabric. And these stitches are usually worked quite close together. So your needle goes in, it comes out at the fold or the edge of whatever you're sewing on. The thread goes behind the needle and you pull through. And when it's nearly all the way through, you come up from behind the loop again and make a knot. This is a really secure stitch. So it goes in, up to the edge, your thread goes behind the needle, pull through, and from behind you come up through the loop and make a knot. Try one of those and you'll get lots of practice. So thread behind the needle, pull through and underneath and make a knot. So there's another stitch. So on this side you've got a row of nice little tight knots which are very secure. On the other side you've got a row of little straight stitches, but those would be underneath on a waistband. You'd never see those normally.